Broadcasting live from Forward Observer Central Command in Austin, Texas. It's the man always out front on the issues. You're listening to Out Front with Mike Shelby.
All right, hello and good afternoon, everyone. It's 2 o'clock somewhere. Glad to be here for another edition of Out Front with Mike Shelby. Today we're going to be talking about No Kings. Shout out to the band Rush. Farewell to No Kings is the title of today's episode. The second half, I'm going to talk about what you should be doing. Well, maybe what you should be doing this weekend and what you should be thinking about doing this weekend. I texted my crew and I said, look, we got a No Kings protest here today coming up on Saturday. Why don't we go out there and have a look around? I'm going to be talking about that and much more. Over 2,000 events to choose from. Literally just pick one and just go and scope it out and get a feel for who these people are and pay attention to the messaging that you see, the demographics, pay attention to the mood, pay attention to what these people are saying or demanding, read the signs, et cetera, et cetera. Talk a lot more about that here in just a second. For now, if you attended last week's webinar on how to build and run your local Intel cell, congratulations. It was a pretty good session, if I say so myself. JC Hopster says the Intel course last week was great. Got 4 solid pages of careful notes. He may have watched it over the weekend, watched the replay. All right. So at any rate, if you would like access to that, I'll figure something out. We'll leave it. Or, maybe I'll put it up on YouTube. Actually, I probably will just put it up on YouTube. So everyone can watch it. If you missed it, you should go and watch that. I break down how to build even just a 2-man Intel shop for the festivities ahead of us. Also, Alien69 says, I see more and more people sharing Gray Zone Intel's work recently. He's a really good dude and has been at it for years. I wish/hope more people start paying attention to him. Do your area study. Well, Alien69, first of all, thank you for that, number one. Number two, I think people have picked up on what I've been putting down. I've noticed, one of the bigger accounts the other day said, it's not a civil war, but this country is locked in a low intensity conflict. And, it's just like, I've been using, that's a DOD term. Okay. So I didn't come up with that term, but I have been pushing it since like 2016 when I realized, this is a form of low intensity conflict that we're definitely in. It is we are in a domestic conflict. It's just not gotten, and it may not get to the conventional stage at any rate. Yes. And also do your area study. All right, guys, a couple of things I want to talk about here is number one, let us get into this thing in Portland. There was a naked bike ride, and a new die-in also, where these people pretended to be dead on some street out in Portland. And they were doing this to protest ICE, and they had a fully permitted by the city. I imagine they did not have a permit to go do this and block traffic, but here they are. There's this picture right here, and there's another one. I could show you some other pictures. Trust me, you do not want to see them. But these people, in addition to being topless, they're saying no one is illegal on stolen land. And the other one said, kick yourself out. We're all immigrants or something like that. I can't see it. I'm going to talk about this as an example. Now, I was just looking in just before the show started. I was looking into the group that organized the naked bike ride, and there's some like Naked Bike Ride International group, World Naked Bike Ride. Apparently, they organize these things all across the country, but this one, all across the world. But this one was apparently special. They said this was an emergency naked bike ride in order to protest ICE. And I saw a lot of people on social media saying how stupid this is, and it's silly and it's wacky, and sure, it is all those things. But I want to tie this back into something that Gene Sharp has written about, or wrote about rather, for decades, which is that sometimes silly protests work. And this is something that obviously could work in Portland. I'm not sure it could work in a Nashville or a Houston or a Phoenix, but it did work in Portland. And this is very important because you always want to choose the tactics for your strategy, and make sure that the tactics that you are pursuing work where you are. There are things that are going to work in the South that are not going to work in the North, just in terms of protests, really in terms of anything you choose to do. But I want to tie this back into this broader color revolution strategy. And the first point here is tactics must align with strategy. Hang on, guys. We've got a little something in the chat. This guy says, this guy is misleading. Maybe not lying, but misleading. Well, please, I don't want to mislead anyone. I want to choose truth and certainly relay the truth on to you. If you would please, in the chat, let me know how I'm misleading you, and I'll be sure to address it. And I will address it at the end of this next part right here. All right, the reason why these, well, first of all, it was 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe 5 weeks ago, the folks over at Indivisible, which is the country's largest protest organizing group, and apparently, I'm not saying that Indivisible is necessarily connected to this nude bike ride, but this would be an example. The folks over at Indivisible said, start experimenting with your tactics. And I took that to mean maybe there's some protest fatigue. Maybe the newness of these protests is wearing off. Maybe people are just like, hey, I don't want to go out and hold a sign here for 2 hours. That's how long my local No Kings protest is going to be this Saturday, by the way. And so a lot of this has to do with fun and joy. And that's one of the things the Naked Bike Ride people said is, this is joy, and joy is protest, or something like that. So a couple of things. This protest was chosen because it obviously drew attention. It was covered in the news. We saw it on the news. How, kind of how silly and wacky it was. But even Gene Sharp says that sometimes silly and wacky protests can be effective. So don't discount them. The second thing is, for people in Portland, I'm sure it's kind of fun. And for people who already do the naked bike ride, I'm sure they'd look for any excuse to go out and be naked on a bike. And so for that matter, it lowers the barrier to participation. Remember, mass appeal. If you want this color revolution to succeed, if you want to get 10, 11, 12 million Americans out in the street to protest, you have to have mass appeal. You have to have mass mobilization, and you can't have mass mobilization without the mass part, and you can't have the mass part unless your action has mass appeal. So lots of people have to get involved. And honestly, this is something that was kind of fun for a lot of people. I'm sure it was fun and different. And I actually think it's not a bad form of protest. As far as protesting ICE goes, it's not something I would do. The other thing too is they want to shift public perception. There is a lot of negative sentiment in the media and among Americans who do not want to see ICE being interfered with or ICE being attacked. I mean, attacks are up 900% or something like that on ICE agents across the country. And so there is an element here where you don't want to be seen as the aggressor. And so if you go out and you have some aggressive form of protest, you will be seen as the aggressor. But if you do a naked bike ride and a nude die-in, it is still a form of organized resistance. It's just not aggressive. And so maybe, I'm sure it's not their primary reason, but one reason I would imagine is it does somewhat turn the temperature down, maybe shifts public perception and shifts public perception that the protests are not aggressive, that the protests are simply illustrating their displeasure with ICE or these current policies. And then finally, I'm sure at some level there is a desire to incite an overreaction and have law enforcement officers haul away naked men and women with their parts flying all over the place, being hauled off by cops, making the news. And that's just something that law enforcement does not want to have to deal with. And, at a certain level, that would probably be good for the protest movement, because it would reinforce that narrative that they're combating a fascist, violent regime. And so I think that's one reason why these people more or less got away with it. All right, let's check back in with this guy who said I was misleading. I don't see a response yet. All right, guys. Well, listen, if any of you think of how I can be misleading, please do let me know. I'll be sure to address it. All right, coming up on No King's Day, that's coming up this Saturday. There are over 2,000 individual protests to choose from. Just choose one. And I don't think, maybe legally, I want to recommend anyone go to these, but I would just say you might consider it. And you, of course, it might behoove you to go and do a little information gathering. We call it a little collection. Just go down there, get on the ground, and see how things go. Let me address some of these comments here before we move on. Do you have to wear an inflatable costume? No, you don't. All right. Sober, I'll keep that for later. Yeah, and some people have been going to them. I drove by one, and there was like 10 people out there. The last one locally, it was more older people with somewhat shockingly puerile, or obscene signs. Yeah, we've all seen the F Trump hats and signs. All right, let's move on. So this the question of the week pertains to this No Kings protest. And one of the things I said is that people ask whether they should be going out and counter-protesting. I think one of the questions last week was, is counter-protesting the best way to effectively counter a color revolution? And the answer is, of course, no. Typically, there's not much to be gained from counter-protesting. If you had a sizable counter-protest, I think maybe the only thing you could do is show that there's some support for your side against a color revolution. I think there are better ways to counter this than counter-protesting. And remember, whenever we're dealing with low-intensity conflict, that is everything from violent social movements to popular revolutions to color revolutions, and I would throw color revolutions in here, obviously, as a form of low-intensity conflict. The thing that you want to do is identify the phase that you're in, and then select a strategy and select the tactics, because we want to roll these phases back. So let's just take like kind of classical Maoist three-phase insurgency here. By the time you get to war of mobility or conventional war, which is the final phase of a Maoist insurgency, that's conventional war. Like, they have taken enough ground now, and they're recruiting that they can actually have a regular military to fight you force on force. You want to roll them back to the guerrilla phase. You do not want them to be able to wield conventional military power, certainly not on the same level as you. And so your goal then is to weaken them to a degree and take away some of their strategic bases so that they are forced back into the back into the guerrilla phase. Once you have an insurgency back in the guerrilla phase, the second phase, your goal is to weaken them further and push them back to the organizational phase. In all cases, the easiest time to beat an insurgency, and we'll lump in a lot of other conflicts like this, but insurgencies, popular revolutions, color revolutions, any kind of political-based conflict where the decisive factor is mass or people, the volume of people who support you or support your cause, the mass of people who give you legitimacy. The easiest time to combat that is in the organizing phase. If you want to stop an insurgency, you got to stop it early. The easiest way is to stop it earliest. at the earliest phase, which is latent and incipient phase, or what I call the organizing phase. And we are absolutely 100% in the organizing phase of this color revolution right now, this color revolution movement. And again, this is not something they're just going to come out. They're not going to come out and email you and say, Adam, we're building a color revolution movement for 2028. Come join our cause. No, of course not. It's just protests right now. And it's protests, and it's about to be resistance. We're on the cusp of this transition from phase 1 to phase 2. And insurgency, phase 2 is guerrilla warfare. In our case, in the United States right now, this movement, it is not an insurgency. Definitely not in the classical sense. There are some proto-insurgent elements, I think, that are happening. And maybe you could say Portland is an insurgency, but we're not facing a national insurgency. Not right now. We're facing a national popular revolution, and specifically this color revolution. And so what you want to do in this first phase is counter-organize. Remember, they're mobilizing is turning out your base. Organizing is expanding your base. So they are in the period right now where they're trying to expand their base. And they're doing this through strategic messaging and propaganda and these protests, which essentially are magnets. They're like magnets for activists. They're trying to get people out to protest, get people on their email list, get people on their text messages and their phone trees, get people signed up on websites like mobilize.us, and get people plugged in and get their contact info, so that's the organizing part, so that when you want them to go to a protest, you send them an email. I've got already our text message. I've gotten like 5 text messages from groups this week trying to get me out to go protest. So one way to counter organize is simply go sign up for their email list. Go make get a burner phone or burner phone number, or get a burner email account, and go sign up at mobilize.us and put your phone number down, or whichever phone number you want to receive text messages and emails, and just see what these people are doing in your area, because this is not just national level, this is local level as well. And trust me, they will text you if you put in your zip code, they will text you where your nearest protest is, and they will try to get you to turn out. That's the mobilizing part, following the organizing part. So in terms of what you can do, I see a lot of people, unfortunately, someone tried to tell me that I was suffering from inaction, and that I was just going to be a slave, because we've just been conditioned to believe that we're slaves and we can't do anything. We don't have any agency, and we have no authority over ourselves. And that's why, and we're weak, or we're cowards, and that's why we're not doing anything, which is 100% false. The doing part of this right now should be counter-organizing. You should be counter-organizing. Starting with your friends and family and your neighborhood and your community. And I'm not saying counter-organize to go out and counter-protest, not saying that at all, but getting these people on board and starting to inform and influence them and explain to them what's going on. This appears to be a protest movement, but that's not all it is. It is a revolutionary movement. It is 100% a revolutionary movement. They don't come right out and say that they're building a revolutionary movement, but you go back to the videos that they do and the training sessions they put on and the little white papers and stuff that they publish, and it's all like Gene Sharp, Color Revolution 101 kind of stuff. Now, there's some other literature in there, but when they use terms like mass political defiance, this is exactly what they're talking about. That's a Gene Sharp term. That's a color revolution term. And so if it walks like a duck and looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, just call it a duck. It's a color revolution movement that they are building. And so part of again, this is not inaction. This is like they're organizing and expanding their base, and we've got to be doing the same thing on the other side right now. We got to be counter-organizing, because everything that stems from here, everything that happens in the future, is going to rely on this base that they're now building. This is like building a foundation for your home. And a lot of people want to go out and build a house on the ground, and that house is going to implode when the first time there's a rainstorm, because you have no foundation. You have no base layer of support. But if you go through and you lay those concrete slabs, and now you can build your house on that, because you got something stable. And remember, sustained protest is that base layer of this entire color revolution movement. Up one layer from protest, you've got organized resistance, and then up one layer up from organized resistance, the roof, You got the actual color revolution. And so that's what they're building right now. And the simplest thing is we got to be counter organized. We have to be building our own base against this counter revolution or this color revolution movement. By the way, we should play a drinking game. Every time I say color revolution, take a shot, and we'll all be out here in about 4 minutes. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about what is to be done this weekend. If we don't go out and counter protest, what should we be doing? Well, consider this. Why don't you text a friend, hop on Signal or whatever, go meet them face to face and say, I did that earlier. And say, hey, let's go down and check out this No Kings protest this weekend. Go to mobilize.us, type in your zip code, or click on their map and keep clicking until you find, or keep zooming until you find your local protest. Grab a couple buddies and go on and head down there. Maybe do a little map recon, figure out where the address is, or find out the address on mobilize.us. Pull it up on Google Maps or Google Earth, do a little map recon, just kind of get a lay of the land for where this is. I already know where our protest is going to be. I know that area well. And we're going to go down there. And I want to introduce you to a term. If you have not heard this before, this term is collection requirements. So think about it like this, okay? In intelligence, we have collectors and we have analysts. And collectors go out. They might be doing signals intelligence collection. They might be doing human intelligence collection, all the various ents. And they're taking this information and they're reporting it back to a two shop somewhere in S2, G2, C2, J2, wherever, or back to an ACE or whatever they have on the military side. And then you have the analysts back there, and also some collectors are attached to the ACE, but you have your analysts back there who are taking all this information in real time and putting this puzzle together. Okay, every single report is a puzzle piece or maybe a couple of puzzle pieces. And you've got to have somebody back there putting the puzzle together to figure out what the enemy strategy is, or to figure out what the enemy is going to do next. They don't have neon signs. A lot of that stuff you've got to figure out and kind of suss out yourself. So remember, you got collectors and you got analysts. We got to be everything. We have to be collectors and analysts because there's just not enough of us. We don't have a fully staffed intel section, obviously. Something I told everyone last week is if you're watching this, if you watch my free intel training webinars, you are the intel guy, or in some cases, you are the intel gal. You may not have an S2 shop attached to you. Who does? But you have to get out of this mindset that you're not an intel person, because if you're watching this, you probably are. You will be, if you follow me for any number of months or years, you are probably, almost certainly, the most knowledgeable person on intelligence that you have in an emergency, or at least at the local level. And you should be networking with members, like-minded members. And I've done this whole webinar on intelligence networking one-on-one, how to build an intel network. People who sat through that webinar know how to get a local intel network up and running at a very basic level, but up and running. And once it's up and running, look, you just run with it. So, yeah, excise that thought from your head that you're not an intel person, because you got to be. Like, you are the intel dude for your area. At any rate, collection requirements. What happens is collection is tasked. So this is not, okay, let's say you're baking a cake. You're not just going to tell someone, one of your kids or a spouse or a friend or whoever, family member, go down to the grocery store and get me whatever you think I need to make a cake. Okay, that's not how it works. You give them an ingredients list. You give them a shopping list. And you say, this is what I want. We're going to bake this cake being intel for the commander. And this is what I need to bake this cake. These are the components that I need. These are the data points or pieces of information that I need. These are the puzzle pieces that I need. Now you go out and collect them. And it's a little more complex than that, but just at a very basic level. That's what happens. So these are called collection requirements. Your shopping list at the grocery store, in intelligence terms, is a collection requirement or a list of collection requirements. So one thing that I would recommend you do is if you do go out, and I think many of you should, go out to the No Kings Day protest, No Kings Day 2.0. After you've figured out where it is, done a little map recon, maybe even conduct a little leader's reconnaissance, drive out there or go walk around, get a lay of the land before Saturday. Just figure out where things are, where this protest is going to be, get your bearings about you, and then try to identify the local groups involved. Because yes, it's indivisible is like kind of the top of the pyramid here, but there are a lot of protest groups individually that have their own names and their own leadership and their own staff at your local level. Identify who those groups are. Some of them are national networks like Code Pink and Answer and all these other people, but some of them may be very local to you. The next thing is I would look for names of organizers and key activists. Remember, as you're walking around, it would probably behoove you to maybe take some photographs or some video. I think in this day and age, it's like fairly common probably to be at a protest and just be taking video around. Keep in mind, I'm sure a lot of these people will be wearing masks. If there are any information booths, sometimes people are tabling. They have tables set up at these protests, and they're handing out their pamphlets and their little cards and their QR codes and all that stuff. Get all that stuff. Get a copy of all that stuff, just as pieces of information. But try to figure out organizers if your city will allow you, or maybe you have to put in a FOIA request. These protest permits are or should be publicly available information. Maybe get a copy of the protest permit and see which names or organizations that have been put down. It may be indivisible. It may be some other group. Maybe some contact info. Email addresses and phone numbers. Let's tuck those away for later. So get the as much as possible. And I wouldn't just go in there asking questions. It's going to be very, very suspicious, very sus, as the kids say. But do try to collect as much information as you can about organizers and key activists. If you have, sometimes these people will be wearing neon colored vests. They're protest marshals. Some of them are paid, but it is a very official position. And these people walk around. They're like the Karens of the protest. They walk around and make sure everyone's flying right and doing the things they want them to do or not doing the things they don't want them to do. Pay attention to those people. Maybe snap a picture if you can. By the way, check all federal, state, and local laws. I'm definitely not encouraging anyone to go out and violate any law in like stalking these people. The next thing I would look at is how they disseminate information. Email lists, phone trees. If they got them, get on them. And when I say burner cell phone, I'm not talking about we're infiltrating China to go whatever. Okay, a burner cell phone. Just have a separate cell phone number where you can get text messages at if you don't want it on your regular phone. Have a second phone number where you can receive text messages. There are all sorts of apps that allow you to do that. And give people that phone number, or text No Kings to whatever number they tell you to text, and get on their list, get on their email list. Figure out how else do they have blogs? Do they have Facebook pages? If so, probably go to those blogs and start reading them and try to get access to those Facebook pages if you can create another Facebook account. Social media. They have social media accounts. Write that stuff down and then go to those social media accounts and check it out. Figure out how they disseminate information. If they are trying to issue a call to action, if they're trying to get a lot of people out, how are they going to contact these people? Be on those contact lists. It's pretty simple. Next, how do they conduct outreach? How do they get more and more people into their movement? How are they attracting people to these protests? And so I think in a lot of cases, they're just leveraging their own networks. Like whenever I go and sign up for an event on mobilize.us, I'll always get the secondary pop-up that says, hey, we've had 1 million more people sign up because you referred friends to us. Do you have a friend who would be interested in this? Great. Go ahead and put in their phone number right here, put in their email address and hit send and send it to us, and we'll get in touch with them. Like, that's a pretty good way they're conducting outreach, because personal recommendations or personal references are highly valued, at least in society. They're not just like cold calling you or cold texting you. It's like, hey, Susan recommended that you might be interested in this protest. Hit yes or no, or hit stop if you don't want it. So figure out how they conduct outreach. This is really critical because when it comes time to start in earnest counter-organizing efforts, part of this strategy would include denying them the ability to organize in the first place. And so easier said than done. And here's the deal. I've been looking for a book on how to defeat color revolutions for like since November. It's one of the first things I looked up. As soon as I saw Indivisible and some of these other groups starting to hold these strategy calls in November, like literally a day after Trump won, and I started getting all these emails. And they're like, we've got to build a national protest movement. We got to stop the dictator and all these things. I said, and the first time they ever used mass political defiance, I was like, well, that's a Gene Sharp color revolution term. So I got on Amazon. I asked ChatGPT, I said, give me a list of books on how to defeat color revolutions. And you know how many of them there were actually dedicated specifically to defeating color revolutions? About this many. There's some documents that kind of go over it, but there is no like manual on how to defeat color revolutions. I'm not saying anything will happen to me because I'm piddly nobody. But if something does happen to me, get a copy. I've got a skeleton. I'm writing a book on how to defeat color revolutions. And I'm serious enough about it that I'm actually spending time writing about it and thinking through it. So when I just look at this objectively and I say, all right, if you want to counter their organizing, what do you have to do? You have to go in, and maybe in some cases that's at the individual level. Maybe sometimes that's at the group or organizational level. You have to go in and inform and influence and get those individuals or get those groups to not go along with it. And let me tell you what I'm talking about. There will be a time in 2028, maybe probably coinciding with the election. And people start to say, well, Mike, how does it, I don't understand. Okay. You get 10 million Americans out in the street saying no to JD Vance or whoever the MAGA candidate is, who steals the election. Cause this is how these color revolutions happen. A majority of color revolutions since 2000 have coincided with national elections. And the claim is that those elections are stolen. And you get this massive, remember, these color revolutions are not spontaneous. People have been laying the groundwork for years, just like we're seeing now. People have been building out this sustained protest movement. People have been laying the groundwork for years, because when it comes time to move to organized resistance, and then when it comes actually time to push the big red button for color revolution, you've got to have these lower layers of activists and protesters and organizers already built. That's what they're building. When these things coincide with elections, it is almost always this dictator stole the election, and we're not going to allow him to do that. And I'm going to tell you exactly how it's going to go down. If this actually does end up happening, if there are credible claims that the 2028 election was stolen for JD Vance or whoever the MAGA candidate is, remember, if a Democrat gets elected, there's no color revolution. There's no need. They did it. They got it. If there's a MAGA candidate who wins, I think part of them will say, by any means necessary, no. And we're going to get a color revolution if that is the case, if enough people believe that's the case. Don't even worry. Listen, I think at a certain level, the protests are almost like background noise. The mass protests are not actually what causes a regime to collapse or a dictatorship to collapse. Okay, it's not the people in the street. The people in the street is just the most visible sign. Remember, there's two reasons why they want mass mobilization protests. Reason number one is because it sends a sign to Democrats to go and fight harder politically, because there are millions of irate activists behind these Democrats, and these Democrat politicians are going to realize that they have support to take a harder stance. This is why we have a shutdown this time, and we didn't have a shutdown last time, because a bunch of these rank and file Democrats and in the activist and protest circles raised hell because Chuck Schumer caved to Trump, and Chuck Schumer got burnt on that one. And now he's not caving in to Trump. And that's why we have a government shutdown. It's because these people successively persuaded him. They said, we're behind you. Shut down the government. Blame it on Trump. We're behind you. So get Democrats to take greater risks. That's the first reason why. And I'm not making this up. This is exactly what Indivisible says. Get Democrats to take a hardline stance against Trump. And the second thing is to show Republicans that there's mass opposition. And one of the reasons why we have seen Schumer and J.B. Pritzker, who's the Illinois governor, and a lot of other Democrats saying that there will be hell to pay, that we're going to hold these people accountable. They are trying to break the Trump coalition. They're trying to break the MAGA coalition. J.B. Pritzker over the weekend was saying effectively, we're going to hold these ICE agents accountable. And like Nuremberg trials kind of stuff, like ICE agents enforcing federal immigration law, which has been enforced for a long, long time, decades. I don't know how long, but it's been enforced for a long time. You can't illegally immigrate to this country. You're not supposed to be able to. But it's like we're going to send these people through the Nuremberg 2.0 trials for arresting illegal aliens who aren't supposed to be here. That's the kind of stuff they're talking about. And then you get into Project 2029, and they're going to pack the Supreme Court or expand the Supreme Court, and they're talking about Senate reform and changing how the Senate works, because they really dislike that Wyoming gets 2 senators and California only gets 2 senators. And that's apportioned representation occurs in the House, not the Senate, but they don't like that. So they're going to, reform the Senate. Just Google it. Google Project 2029. There's all sorts of stuff out there on what they're trying to do. At any rate, someone asked me this morning, Mike, what's their ultimate goal? That's Project 29 is their ultimate goal, is to do Project 2025, but on the, we'll say, progressive side, give us a progressive version of 2025. And they want to do that in 2029. So at any rate, oh yeah, let me tell you how this is going to go down. Remember, it's not the people in the street. The people in the street just send a message. Okay. It's the base layer. That's not the tip of the spear. The tip of the spear is what happens when you have politicians coming out and saying the election was stolen and that people need to raise hell. But wait, there's more. When CEOs of these Fortune 500 companies come out and start saying, we are concerned that this election was stolen. And when you have people actually, let me show you this right here. When you have people in business, in labor, in faith institutions, so pastors, ministers, people in education, obviously education's already been captured. Civil service, when you have federal employees, and when you have military and police officers, when you have that, you remember the Hunter Biden laptop thing, and you had 61 or how many ever it was, former intelligence officers come out and write that. Okay, they're trying to give legitimacy to the claim that the Hunter Biden laptop story was a Russia hoax, and they just wanted to paper over it. Maybe some of them believed that. Obviously, they were wrong. But when we start seeing, that's the reason why all these generals and former diplomats and all these people, they're signing these open letters, is to give legitimacy to their cause. Because if you're a normie American and you say, 400 former national security advisors or national security and military officers and whoever put their name on this thing, 400's a lot. These people must be right. It's a legitimacy. When they start doing that, but it's not about Hunter Biden, it's about the outcome of the 2028 election, you're going to have normie American, just Joe Blow. Maybe he's conservative, maybe he's moderate, maybe he doesn't care about politics. But this is all he's going to be fed for days and weeks and months on end until eventually he believes, he becomes a true believer, and he says, the election was stolen, regardless if it was or not. The election was stolen, and that's not right. And we need to do the right thing and defend democracy and make sure this guy who won the election doesn't get to be president. And at what point he's willing to get involved, well, that's going to come later. Or at what level he's going to get involved. But that's how this color revolution is going to go down. The people in the streets, the millions of Americans in the streets, that's just like, I don't know, it's not icing on the cake. That's just the base layer. But the actual tip of the spear is when these 6 pillars, people involved, begin defecting, and they say, we're not going to support, we're not going to recognize, we're not going to provide any legitimacy, we're not going to follow the authority of a President-elect Vance because Trump stole the election for him. This is exactly how it's going to go down. If it does go down coinciding with the election, that's exactly how this is going to go down. Of the 9 classic color revolutions, You had 6 that coincided with national elections. You had 3 that happened outside of the elections, and one color revolution happened because the prime minister was assassinated, and that kicked off the color revolution. 2 other times you had presidents or prime ministers trying to expand their executive authority unlawfully, and people just said, we're not going to do this. We're going to go ahead and launch this color revolution. But remember, even then, these are not spontaneous. You can't just go 0 to 100 on a color revolution. For years, you've got to be building the groundwork. You got to be building these base layers to support what you're trying to do. And so that these people, this is the establishment left. No one should confuse this. We're talking about the establishment left here. We're talking about deep state people, deep pocket money people, financiers, providing money to do all these things. They've got 3+ years still to go. They can build for the next 3 years, and they will. They absolutely will. But that's what they're building. So I don't think anyone should be obviously not surprised. But just remember, if people are skeptical, I don't know. I guess I didn't do a good enough job saying this, but part of our job is to inform and influence people as to exactly what's happening. And there are a lot of people I see on X, especially like Data Republican and Mike Benz and a bunch of people talking about these things. And we have to keep pushing, and we got to keep sharing that stuff. Keep sharing those tweets and keep sharing these emails, explaining or these videos, explaining what's going on. Because back in January, I started talking about how this whole thing was going to play out. So you can go back in the archive and see all that stuff. The fight right now is explaining to people what's happening, because I think, unfortunately, people are misinformed that this is just a protest movement, because that's what these people say. Oh, we think the Trump regime is fascist, and we want to protest that. We're the good guys, and they're the bad guys. Well, if they can get a majority of Americans or a plurality of active Americans to believe that, perception is reality. So that's where we are now. Remember, ultimately, they win if the decisive factor here is legitimacy. The legitimacy is the recognized rightful authority, or who has the claim on the rightful authority. Elections confer legitimacy in this country. That's why when we have an election like 2024 and you have Trump winning the Electoral College and the popular, pretty unassailable claim to legitimacy there. Like, he is undisputedly the president. And the problem is, when you can credibly claim, and again, credibility, I should put an asterisk by that word, because credibility does not actually mean that there's solid proof. Perception is reality. You just have to give the perception that the election was fraudulent. And if you can convince enough people to do that, then you have a really good shot at winning. Remember, going back to 1986, all these color revolutions and revolutions that would be today called a color revolution. Remember, color revolution didn't exist in 1986. But we can go all the way back to 1986. There's like a 78% success rate for color revolutions. That's pretty darn good. And that's another reason why I'm doing this show now. I talk about more things than just intelligence. I want to talk about this stuff as well. All right, as a reminder, we will, I got an ebook. Listen, I ran out of paper copies. No more left. I'm not going to have any new paper prints of this book, the Area Intelligence Handbook. I'm working on a second edition, however, and I'm going to try to get that out in November. That's next month. That's a second edition, expanded. I have a lot more like links and tools and references in there for you this go around. If you'd like the ebook, it's up on Amazon, by the way. All right, with that, as always, if you have questions, go ahead and drop your questions into the chat. If you would do me a favor, just put a Q before your question so I can find it quickly. Otherwise, let's see here. Lots of comments to go through. And guys, if you can just bear with me as I go through these. Zoboso is looking forward to the second edition. Well, thank you. And whatever your name is, I appreciate it. 70% of color revolutions succeed. So going back to 1986, 78%, according to my spreadsheet. What happened in the ones that failed? Well, the people who were in charge remained in charge mostly. So this is obviously kind of like the $1 million question, which is, what are the factors that led to success and that led to failure in these color revolutions? That's why I've got this spreadsheet up, and I'm going through each of these color revolutions one by one, and it's an extremely time-intensive process. I probably need a research assistant, honestly. But yes, by what means, I will get to that. I will tell you, honestly, guys, like Russia, Iran, a few of the others where color revolutions failed, no one's going to like this answer. But it's because you just had an iron grip on power. And I think the real travesty of this is if this color revolution does proceed, they're going to blame it on fascism. And it doesn't matter if Trump is not a fascist. It does not matter. They're effectively either going to take over or push whoever's in charge to become authoritarian, unfortunately. There is no, if this color revolution does happen, it will either succeed or it will be defeated. And no one wants to see how it gets defeated. But unfortunately, historically, that's just the way you defeat it. What I'm looking for is in the 21st century, when you have social media and the internet and tools like we have today, can that be done? And I'll tell you, remember, the number one mistake that governments make, and this is just universally true, the number one mistake that governments make when dealing with insurgencies or revolutions of any type is they wait too long to act. I'm somewhat optimistic that many people understand what's going on. I was talking to someone in the administration last week, and I asked, and I did not get, I get that they're going after Antifa. I told you they would a couple of months ago, even before Charlie Kirk. I said, they're going to go after Antifa. I said, do not doubt me. And they are. They're going after Antifa. But in terms of the color revolutionaries, that is a much, much bigger problem. And I'm not sure how attuned they are to the threat. I'm hoping that they've got somebody who is tracking all this stuff. I'm not positive. Yes, I know. No one knows what fascism anymore. No one knows what fascism is. Because fascism is anything the left doesn't like. All right, let's get to some other questions here. Basically, the communist socialists realized that traditional class revolution can't work in the U.S. because there's too much wealth, so they transitioned to a color revolution based on the oppressor oppressed. Well, I think the reason why they realized that a class-based revolution cannot work is because we're dealing basically with three classes. Yes, you have like the uber wealthy, and then you have the middle class, and you cannot, the middle class does not want a class-based revolution because they look at what these communists are proposing in like expropriation of wealth. No one in the middle class wants that. And workers' ownership of the means of production. No small business owner wants that. No corporation. I mean, not to be like rude or flippant, but does anyone actually believe that workers who vote on what their company does in a direct democratic system where the workers actually vote on the future course of the company, does anyone trust the voters to do better than a successful CEO? Do you think workers involved in direct democracy over the future of, I don't know, OpenAI or Tesla or I don't know, Answer Corporation here, do you think they'd be able to do a better job than a successful CEO? The answer is obviously no. So I think the real reason why they realize that is because they just realize they're never going to win over the middle class. Maybe that's the reason they want to erode the middle class. Because once you erode the middle class, you don't have to win them over because they're all peasants now. And now maybe they'll support the peasant revolt that all these people are talking about. Yeah, this is a good point, Earl. Social media accelerates mimetic warfare. In the time to create a color revolution, the Arab Spring began as the Arab Spring did not begin as a tweet. And just a minor point of correction, I'm not familiar with the tweet you're talking about, but it started in Tunisia with this guy named Mohamed Bouazizi, who lit himself on fire in protest. He was a fruit cart vendor, and this was back in 2010. And it's one of those things where I don't think it was predictable, but he got his fruit cart got ransacked or whatever because they didn't have a license or a permit or something like that. I mean, let's be honest. You're a fruit vendor in Tunisia. Like, your life's probably not all that to begin with. And now all of a sudden the police roughed him up and ransacked his cart or something like that because he didn't have a permit to sell fruit or something like that. So that's what kicked off the Arab Spring. Maybe someone tweeted about that, but I think that, no pun intended, caught fire in local news and made a lot of people very angry. But your first sentence, social media accelerates mimetic warfare. Absolutely. And listen, I remember Indivisible's coming out, allegedly. They've chosen a color. And, well, a lot of people said it's going to be purple. I don't know what the color is actually going to be. I think purple's a good bet because they even kind of talked about this. Purple is a mix of red and blue. And if you want kind of a unity color, purple, and this is what you say, we're Democrats and Republicans, and we're saving democracy. Maybe purple is it. But immediately, we need purple MAGA hats. And everything's got to be purple. They cannot be allowed to own that color. You remember, everything, narratives, space, all this stuff has to be contested. And I'm not talking about physical space like protests. I'm talking about like mental space online. Has to be contested. And I think one really good way is to simply take ownership of the color, or at least compete for ownership of the color, so that when you go out and you see the sea of purple, you in the color revolution crowd, you equate it to something else. And Trump has the opportunity to do the funniest thing ever, which is purple MAGA hats. And then everyone just has, I mean, I hate to say you've got to buy anything from Trump, but everyone just needs to start wearing like pro-Trump purple stuff. And you got to take the color away from them. You cannot just give them the color. That's one reason why I actually thought them choosing the American flag might be a course of action. But we'll see. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm waiting to hear. Color revolution term is so confusing, and I still don't think anyone has articulated it simply yet. Well, I hope that I just did. You know, the thing is, it's like Clausewitz said about war. Everything in war is simple, but the simplest of things is difficult. And it's kind of the same thing with color revolutions. It is actually a phenomenally simple concept. I just showed you that graphic earlier about how you get people you get individuals and groups and organizations in business, labor, faith, education, civil service, and military and police. And you get them to withdraw their support. You get them to withdraw their cooperation. That's why it's called strategic non-cooperation. You get these people in organizations and corporations to simply say, we're not going to recognize the incoming president because he was fraudulently elected. We're not going to lend him our support. We're not going to attend the inauguration. We're not going to do any of these things. We're not going to do contracts with the government. In every case, we're going to withdraw our cooperation as much as possible. And listen, here's the thing. I was reading about the Serbian revolution, the bulldozer revolution in 2000, and they started to describe the 6 pillars of support that they tried to undermine from Milosevic. And as soon as I started reading about the 6 pillars, I said, whoa. Indivisible. This image right here is from Indivisible. Also, the exact same 6 pillars. Guys, it's the same playbook that was used in Serbia and Ukraine and a bunch of other these color revolutions. I was already headed that way mentally, but as soon as I saw the 6 pillars in both countries, I was This is it. Like this is a color revolution that they're building here, obviously. So at any rate, Jay, I hope I've articulated that a little more clearly for you. But again, it's kind of simply understood. But then when you get into the strategy and tactics, it becomes a lot more complex. You know, we've heard about the American Bukele. I don't know that we need here. Okay, here's the thing. I don't think you can make a direct comparison between the United States and El Salvador. For one, we have this incredible history and this incredible heritage in this country of the people, and I don't mean that in any ironic way, but the people actually wielding power. If we get an American Bukele, it will be because we have failed to do this. We have failed to counter-organize. We have failed to defeat the color revolution in its infancy. And this is something that everyone can play a part in. You have to go out and counter-organize. You have to organize more people against the color revolution than they can organize for it. And if we can organize more people against the color revolution, it's going to fail. Simple as. We have to look at these 6 key pillars of support. And they are trying to erode these pillars of support because they say, look, we whittle these pillars of support down and this regime is going to collapse. And at a certain level, it's up to us to reinforce those. And specifically, I mean, I really think the big domino is legitimacy. The question is, who will be the legitimate victor of the 2028 presidential election? And unfortunately, that's probably going to be the trigger, and that is going to be the decisive event. And the outcome of that event will be determined by who is seen as legitimate. I hope that makes sense to everyone. All right, Brian says, well, happy birthday, and go out there and have fun. All right. Iceman brings this up. Very good point, which is the elite. All right. This is something that Jack Goldstone brings up, and he wrote a book called Rebellions and Revolutions in the Early Modern World. Let's see, it's not on my desk. I cite this book often. And one of the things he says is that when you look at revolutions, you almost always think that they're bottom up. It's like pitchforks and shovels. And the peasants rise up and they overthrow the monarchy, or they overthrow their rulers, and then they win. And historically, he pretty much demolishes the case that is true, because that's not true. And like Iceman says, it's not what actually causes civil wars or revolutions is not actually a bottom up revolt. It's a fracturing of the elites. And Peter Turchin also talks about this. You have a fracturing of the elites into the elites and counter elites. And it's not until you get a fracturing at the top that the people at the bottom start to line up behind their side, the elites or the counter elites. And that is actually when you get civil wars and popular revolutions, or any kind of, I guess most forms of revolution. Our American Revolution is the same thing. Yes, of course, there were the Minutemen and the Continental Army and the militias and the farmers out there feeding the troops. Okay, yeah, sure, that's right. But the elites of that time were our founders, and it wasn't until we saw this fracturing of the elites between the British Crown and the elite colonists that you actually got any kind of movement. When the elites get pinched, you get movement, and not until then. So when I talk about business CEOs, okay, those are members of the elites, and labor unions, and people at the highest echelons of government. That's the fracturing of elites. And I think Trump is a counter elite, and I think his 2016 win was pretty much the beginning of this fracturing of elites and counter elites. There's a lot more that goes into that, like elite overproduction and blah, blah, blah. Lots of people have talked about that. I'm sure you've heard it before. But otherwise, good point. Yes, Paulie, I've also seen those texts. a text message to buy pizza for No Kings protesters. And someone shared that in one of our local groups here, local political groups. And yes, this lady said, "Oh, can you pitch in and buy a pizza or two for these college protesters for this thing?" And remember, this is all about mutual aid. Have a need, say a need. Even if it's just buying pizza for people. All right, Anonymous Anglo, appreciate that. Very much do. Thank you. If you have a question, drop it in the chat. All right. I'm not sure what comment you're talking about. I see your comments. All right, guys, if you have questions, I'll spend a few more minutes here. If anyone has any questions, just drop a Q in the chat. So if this color revolution success is directly affected by the wealth of the middle class, well, that's not exactly what I said. But how would we be able to counteract this economic sabotage? Well, the color revolution success is directly affected by who withdraws their legitimacy. And when you have when you have business leaders, labor leaders, faith leaders, education leaders, civil servants, and senior levels of military and police saying that the guy who won the election is not the legal victor, is illegitimate, that when they come out, see, here's the problem, or one of the problems. You have all these pro-democracy watchdogs and these election NGOs, and they're all run by leftists, and they go around the world and they say whether these elections were fair or not. And what happens is, when you get New York Times and CNN, and I mean, even though, yes, I think the dinosaur media, I think they have far less credibility. But one thing that I'm concerned about is when you do have these large election NGOs coming out and saying, we've monitored over 100 elections in these democratic countries, and we can authoritatively say that this election was stolen. That's going to carry a lot of weight. And that's going to shape a lot of public opinion. It doesn't matter if the election was stolen or not. You've got good guy election watchers, NGO people saying the election was stolen. For all intents and purposes, the election was stolen when they say it is, when they say it was. Because remember, perception is reality. So maybe there will be some barrier of proof there. You can only hope that you can go in. This is why the counter narrative is so important. And this actually is one thing I've seen the Trump administration do on X specifically, is they'll take a claim that was put out in the media, and then they'll come back and correct it and say, well, here's the fact, or at least the facts according to them. And whether or not those are facts, somewhat immaterial for this argument, which is just that they have been firing back with the counter narrative. What I was saying about the middle class is I think the class-based revolutionary people realize that no middle-class father or mother wants expropriation of their wealth to go to someone else's kids. They kind of don't want that. So I think that's one reason why the class-based revolution, they tried the race-based thing, didn't get enough traction. Try the class-based thing. We'll see. This one will be cutting straight to the heart of, there's really three centripetal forces in holding this place together. It used to be America was 90% white, similar heritage, same language, roughly similar religion. I mean, mostly forms of Christianity, Catholicism, whatever, Protestant Christianity. And, we're kind of like a more or less a proper nation. And we're far less so that anymore. Oh yeah. So basically the three centripetal forces are, we have a relative to the rest of the world, relatively strong and stable economy, relative to the rest of the world, strong and stable currency, the dollar. And I know the dollar is the worst currency in the world, except for all the others, mostly. And then free and fair elections. That is the third centripetal force. All three of these are under some level of duress. So if we get into 27, 28, and maybe we're in a recession, I don't know. And maybe we have a dollar crisis after the midterms going into the 28 presidential election. I don't know. And then you have, lastly, at least some perception of relatively free and fair elections. And I know we'll throw an asterisk on there as well. But like all three of these centripetal forces that are holding this place together are all of a sudden being eroded. I don't know. Kind of sounds like a recipe for disaster to me. No, a color revolution is not a race revolution. A color revolution, they call it a color revolution because most of the time they have a color symbol like red or orange or green that is a national symbol of unity and solidarity. And so they choose this color to represent their movement, which is for democracy and for truth, freedom in the Iranian way or the Russian way or the American way or the Serbian way, whatever they call it. All right, Andre, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate that. Will leftists resort to destroying infrastructure in the event of color revolutions? I ask because a conspiracy I believe in was recently proven correct when it was found mass fires started in the Palisades, California fire were caused by a leftist. Well, the first question, or the question, will leftists resort to destroying infrastructure in the event of a color revolution? And frankly, that has to be considered as a course of action. And I don't think this is anything that's going to be directed from the top down. But when you get into, I'm just going to use insurgencies here, okay, to illustrate the case of legitimacy. I remember I had a buddy when on my Iraq tour, I had a buddy that was sent up to the Beji oil refinery in Iraq. And Iraq was getting like 90% of its government revenue from oil. And so obviously, if you're Al-Qaeda, you destroy the main oil or one of the large oil refineries in Iraq. You hurt government revenues, which degrades their ability to defeat the insurgency. Attacking critical infrastructure is pretty much just a tried and true, like pretty much any insurgency you look at, you will find some degree of attacks against critical infrastructure. And the reason you do this, well, maybe a couple of reasons. Number one is when people get pissed off, they want solutions. And so when they try to turn on their power and there's no juice, when there's no running water, when there's no radio, when there's no whatever, they tend to get angry. And what the insurgents say is, why are you supporting the government? These people can't even keep your lights on. They're so inept. You need to replace the government. Put us in charge. We'll make sure your lights come on. And in some cases, they have been correct. The thing that they probably don't tell everyone is that, oh yeah, we're the guys that cut off your power. But the narrative there is that the government can't keep the lights on because they're corrupt. Oh, you know where the funding went for your local power station? It went into this guy's wallet because he's corrupt. And he doesn't care about you. And he doesn't care that it's 100 degrees outside and you've got a 6-month-old infant at home who's at risk of dying of heat exposure. He doesn't care. He's got his money. That's why we have to replace these people. In so many words, basically that's what they say. And you will get some part of the populace who get pissed off and they say, what will it take? Like, how can I help? How can I support you? Just turn my lights back on. So that's one reason. Another reason why everyone should expect at least the possibility of disrupted critical infrastructure is because historically, color revolutions in the internet age, the internet comes down. Why? Because you prevent communications. The government can still communicate, but you prevent communications of the revolutionaries. And that's one reason why. And like a lot of cases, the government has turned off the electricity to certain parts of a city or certain parts of a country, and there's no cell service and there's no internet in certain parts of the country, certain parts of a city. And they do that deliberately. So I'm not, I almost hate to say it because I'm not saying the Trump administration would do this, but just historically, it has happened before. You should be preparing for that possibility if these things do happen. And, and again, I'll just say this. Sometimes I say this stuff and it sounds so extreme. because all I'm doing is sharing with you lessons from history and sharing how color revolutions have occurred in the past. And like, let's just extrapolate from there and figure out what this could look like in the United States. So, Andre, I appreciate it. Good question. I would say, again, I don't think this is going to be a deliberate top down where people say, yeah, go out and attack power stations. But we're not even, I mean, we've seen people attacking power stations already under like semi-normal conditions. So I think it is extremely appropriate for you to make plans, or at least to consider your course of action in the event that a power substation does go down near you. Well, let's see. This is more of a statement. But I saw in the past day, Vosh, listen, I don't know who Vosh is other than some idiot leftist online, was covering the fact that Dominion voting machines were bought out by a Republican. This appears to be seed sowing of illegitimacy. You know, I did see that, and I have not looked into it. Other than I think this is this is the exception generally, because most time when people don't have a question, they just have a statement. It's like kind of bad, but this one's actually kind of good. Yeah, I've also noticed in the New Republic and I think Politico and some other places, I've also noticed that I have read articles that the Trump administration is already planning to steal the midterms. So obviously, and listen, you look at this mid-decade redistricting thing, and Republicans are just erasing Democrat seats and creating Republican seats. I think Robert said we're maybe up Republicans are maybe up plus 14 heading into the midterms. If I think, as I understand it, these challenges are still going through the court system, but if they are upheld, Republicans may keep the House only because of this mid-decade redistricting. And we're obviously going to hear from the left that the midterms were stolen and that the Republicans' grip on power has expanded. You know, I said previously, my baseline assumption, and listen, sometimes you have to make key assumptions. My baseline expectation, my key assumption right now is that a color revolution will probably coincide with the 2028 presidential election outcome, because they need something legitimate they need a legitimate reason to launch this color revolution. But listen, there is a chance that we see it after, maybe in 2027, that we see it after the midterms. And maybe they say, we're not going to do this for 2 more years. We're not going to allow the Trump administration to entrench themselves for 2 more years. And to continuing to, maybe it comes down to these voter, a lot of these states are highly resistant to removing illegal aliens from these voter rolls, or to otherwise clean them up at the state level and then at the county level. And maybe this does come down to maybe they fear that if Republicans keep the House, some way, somehow, the Trump administration will actually do some weird census thing and publish the census results prior to the 28 elections, which will go through another reapportionment process. I don't know. There's a lot of kind of ifs in these scenarios, and it's all speculation. But I would just say my expectation is it doesn't happen until 28, early 29, late 28, 29. Maybe it happens before then. We'll see. But Echo, rare exception of a comment being good. Thank you. Iceman says, I'm taking a GIS class at a community college. What software do you suggest we learn to collect and manage intel? In order of importance would be helpful. Well, most of this GIS stuff is going to happen on like ArcGIS. In terms of, I guess you're talking about, I don't know. Whenever you say collect intel, it's like, well, what kind of, first of all, just real quick, intelligence collection is a misnomer, because you don't really collect intelligence. You develop intelligence. You collect information of intelligence value, and you turn that into intelligence. So, listen, I use Obsidian when I'm going through and saving articles or copy and pasting stuff. I literally just copy and paste it, throw it in Obsidian, like notebook, It's like a digital notebook. Before that, I used Evernote. I don't have anything against Evernote except they like want to put stuff in the cloud, and I don't want a lot of stuff in the cloud. I just want a local copy, frankly. So I use Obsidian if that's what you're talking about. All right, let's see here, guys. Looking for another question. Oh man, a good question. What are the odds that a state actor might assist? Listen, frankly, I don't know. I don't know, but you can just look at kind of the usual usual suspects, and I don't know China well enough to say that they would or would not get involved. Apparently, according to Data Republic and from some other people, there are foreign funds flowing into these left-wing networks. Yeah, so listen, I don't know. I'll just leave it there because I honestly, I don't know other than to say, probably pretty good because they've already been involved in things previously. Listen, I'm seeing a lot of back and forth on whether I should post the webinar. It's like an hour long on how to build and run a local Intel cell. Someone said I shouldn't post it because they don't want the wrong people looking at it, which, okay, fair point. I imagine, well, we'll see. I might put it up on YouTube maybe for like a couple days. Maybe I'll upload it this week or leave it up over the weekend and then take it down or something. All right, guys, we'll do a couple more questions here. Any idea about what percentage of generals disagree with the new policies? I don't, but I'm just going to assume that all these generals are political appointees, basically, and anyone who was promoted over the past 4 years into any kind of flag officer billet, I'm just going to go ahead and guess. Well, that also, I don't know, Mike. Someone with a better grip of senior military leadership today is going to be better able to answer that question. Honestly, just don't know. If there are any jihadi Mumbai-style swarm attacks between now and 2027, how would those affect the color revolution? Well, that's a really good question. I know, and listen, I've heard all this. Sarah, how many was it? Like 8 or 16 hours or something like that. She's been on Sean Ryan's show. I've listened to all of them. I mean, I think she has. I would just say this. I would just treat that threat credibly, that there will be, or that people are at least planning a 9/11 2.0. I think maybe, and at some level, maybe that, I'm sure at some point that would undermine the legitimacy of the Trump administration, because people will say, well, you knew about this and you didn't stop it. And, you get these kinds of things. Maybe on the flip side, maybe as another course of action or another consequence or result, you have this like the 9/12 thing where Americans come together, and maybe that reduces the potential of a color revolution. I don't know. Probably depends a lot on what happens and where it happens and when it happens. But there's just way too much speculation for me to give you a better answer than that, other than to say, I don't know. But listen, whenever you don't know a question, you just look at all the possible outcomes. Okay, what's feasible and what's not feasible. And then you have your list of potential courses of action. And then you just start looking through the data to rank those by what's more likely and what's less likely. And eventually you arrive at a most likely course of action. And then you have your second and third and whatever. And then you have your most dangerous course of action. By the way, I see this guy on Twitter. Apparently he's a former soft guy. I don't know. But he writes these little intel reports. And under his most likely course of action, he has least likely course of action. Guys, that is bullshit. There's no reason. I have never, literally never, ever one time seen any kind of intelligence document that points out the least likely scenario. I mean, if your least likely course of action, just think about this just for 1 second. Okay. You're a decision maker. You're a consumer of intelligence reporting or an intelligence report. Do you care what the least likely course of action is? No. You want to know what the most likely is, what the most dangerous is, and then maybe the second and the third most likely course of action. But the least likely course of action, holy shit, guys, the thing is useless, absolutely useless. Sorry, but sometimes his posts come up on my Twitter feed, and it's just like how useless, and it's all just Chat GPT slop anyway. Useless, absolutely useless. But it's intel. All right. All right, guys, I'm going to do one other question. All right, last question here. How would you insulate yourself against a successful color revolution, or are we past the point of no return? Well, listen, the prime directive has not changed. The prime directive is that you be in a position to protect and provide for your family. Part of that is obviously having the means of self-defense, having a network, a neighborhood watch, at least some neighbors who can come together. Part of that is being as self-sufficient as you can. Figure out what you need. It's food, it's water, it's medication, whatever. Being able to navigate that disruption, get through that disruption. Everyone should kind of be a prepper to some, and I'm not saying you need to stock, 7 years worth of food or whatever, beans and rice in your basement. But you should have, I used to think, like 2 to 4 weeks. And then 2020 hit and I was like, yeah, probably like 3 to 6 months. Like I'd feel a lot better if I had 3 to 6 months worth of stuff, but like food, I don't think that's inappropriate, honestly. Even if it's just Mountain House and you got it, you haven't even removed it from the boxes yet. I think something like that is appropriate, but it's remember, it's have the means of self-defense, have a means to produce local intelligence, because you want early warning, you want situational awareness. Your rifles are not providing you situational awareness. Only intelligence can do that. So do your area study, have your local intelligence network. And number 3 is develop real-time collection capabilities. That's what I teach in special projects, how to do those things, how to be the intelligence officer for your neighborhood. And I'll just repeat those. Do your area study, build your local intelligence network of human sources, and then, maybe buy some gear. Buy some like basic rudimentary SIGINT gear, have your open source intelligence feed set up, develop real-time collection capabilities. Because if the shit does hit the fan, information is going to be worth not worth its weight in gold. Information is going to be extremely valuable when it's harder to come by, when the internet's shut off or when the power's out. So yes, you've got to have local information coming in. And with that, everyone, that's going to do it for this week's episode of Out Front with Mike Shelby. Listen, I really appreciate you watching. Thanks for the super chats. I, of course, don't do this for the super chats, but they are highly appreciated, somewhat encouraged also. And everyone, thanks so much. Listen, if you want to support me, here's one way. Head over to forwardobserver.com. That's my website, /radar, forwardobserver.com/radar. That's the email list. I'm not going to email you 5 times a day. You might be good to get 5 emails a month from me, but otherwise I need to do a better job of just occasionally sending out stuff that I think you should be aware of. forwardobserver.com/radar. That's my email list. And I'll be sending out an email very soon about some of this and some other stuff. All right, guys, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for the support. Early warning, folks. We'll see you. Actually, I will not be on the morning briefing tomorrow, but I will be back on Thursday. But Robert and Jared will be holding down the fort. Everyone, thanks so much, and have a great rest of your day. And until next time, be well and stay out front.